Right, so this is my finished HaloRC Osiris, and if you followed my community posts, you'll know that this is kind of almost the second time that I've built it, as I just pull a massive twig out the side. This is almost the second time I've built it, because what my plan was to do a full build video, and I did film that in its entirety. And then when I got to the part where I was going to film the Fettec setup and the Kiss flight control, the Fettec flight controller setup, the flight controller died. So basically what I've had to do is go back and install, in this case, a Kiss V2 flight controller, which basically buggered up my build video. And I've messed around for some time, trying to sort of splice the two together and trying different things. And to be honest, I'm sick of looking at it. So what we're going to do here is just have a quick overview of my HaloRC build, and then at a later date, I like this frame so much that I bought myself another one, and I'm going to build that one with sort of more cheaper components, but still using Kiss V2, and see if I can feel a big difference between a more expensive build and a cheaper build. But just before I move on to this guy, which I absolutely love, I just want to talk about this guy compared to this guy. So this is the Fettec board running Kiss V2, and this is the original Kiss V2 flight controller, and mine's been depinned because it was in a really low profile build. So you can see the boards are a relatively similar size. The Fettec flight controller came with 30.5, or should I say 30mm holes as well, and the idea of it is you just snap them off, and because this was a 20x20 build, I just snapped them off and used the 20x20 holes. But this is kind of labelled as a 20x20 flight controller, and it isn't really, because 20x20 flight controller should be tiny, and as you can see, as I said, it's pretty much the same size, and in fact bigger than its normal Kiss V2 teammate. And the Kiss flight controller, I weighed the one that I put in the frame that had all its connectors on, and the Kiss flight controller is actually 0.5 gram lighter. Which begs the question, why would you use this? Even forgetting about the fact that mine died a death, and the reason why it died a death is because one of its components has failed here, and that looks like strangely like an LED. But yeah, I can't really explain that at all. 1 minute it was fine, and the next minute there was no sign of life, no smoke, no nothing. It just failed on me. So setting that aside, perhaps that was a one-off, perhaps I was just really unlucky, I don't know. But the bigger question to me is why you would choose this over this. It has the same amount of UARTs. It's pretty much set up in the same way in terms of the pin layout, etc. Serial RX3 and TX3 are still on the same type of pin connector. It has the same sort of pads. It doesn't really do anything that the Kiss V2 flight controller already did. The one thing it does do is you can solder directly your TBS Crossfire and a TBS Unify directly to it using pin connectors. But while you can do that, the bigger question to me is why you would want to. Because if you were soldering, the Unify onto this, for argument's sake, that thing runs hot as hell, and you really want something burningly hot sat on top of your sensitive F7 gyro, F7 chip, or the gyro for that matter. The Crossfire receiver is hugely noisy, and you really want that amount of noise again sat on your flight controller where all the sensitive stuff is happening. So for me, the only people I could think who might benefit from this sort of stacking system are maybe racers, and I wonder if that's who this is targeted at, because if you're racing and you were using 25 milliwatts and you had a very tight frame with a little bit of height but no length, like we get on the freestyle quads, maybe that would be attractive. But for my purposes, I don't think I'm ever going to buy one of these again. And that's not because it died on me, although of course I'd have to factor that in, but just because the layout on this is so much better. And because it's in this sort of H shape, when you put it in your on top of your ESC, you have access and so much space in between this sort of H. You can stick a sort of buzzer here and a cap here. It just, for me, works better, especially if you're using it with the Wolf PDB or anything like that. Whereas this guy, it's a little bit cheaper, but for me, it doesn't offer anything that I can't do better on this. So yeah, so that's my quick review on this. You know, unless you want to save the couple of quid difference, or you're a racer and you've got a particular build where you need to mount your VTX and your receiver onto this board, that's what I think. So, on to better things. So this is the HaloRC frame that I raved about, and it hasn't let me down, thankfully. And I love it. I think quite often with frames, they're kind of easy to love out of the box, but you don't really know a frame until you've built it and flown it. Building tends to expose quite a lot of problems with frames. So I'm just going to take this guy apart, and I'm loving this hero mount because the lens protector that I printed off from Bloods' files actually stays on my Hero 7, which usually they don't. So I'm actually going to run it with this mount, as opposed to what I was thinking about doing is just getting a bigger mount for it, a full body mount. So you can see, just to start off, I'm using my DJI unit with the Lollipop V3 antennas. And the reason for that is, other than testing linear antennas, which I haven't got around to doing yet, these guys work really, really well. And I particularly like the way that we've got the DJI mount in sort of the antennas in this direction, as opposed to the more common sort of scissor like so, which to me, this gives much better overall reception. And obviously, if you don't want to use separate antennas and you want to use the DJI ones, then that's the mount that you would use, and it would sit like so. But you can see, just before I take the top plate off, you can see that the SMA mount sits further back on the frame, which does two nice things actually. One, it gives you tons and tons of battery space, acres of battery space. And the other, when you're putting on your SMA connectors, it means you've got a lot of space and everything doesn't get crammed up at the back of the air unit, which is common on frames and is a bit of a bugbear of mine. And you can see this TPU piece, A, goes over the rear standoff, but B, slots over the back of the frame, just to make it a little bit more rigid. So if I get this guy out of the way, and just to zoom in a little. So here you see it. So at the back, obviously we've got the air unit in its 3D printed cradle. At the front, we've got the camera. And if I go into the individual components, first of all, I'm using both the cap that came with the Fettec ESC and the separate spike absorber. And the idea of the spike absorber, rather than sort of dampening voltage spikes like a capacitor will do, the spike absorber literally removes them and converts them into heat. And I've basically just soldered the two together here. Use some shrink wrap around it and zip tied it to that front standoff. Next to it I have my Vifly Buzzer, which is basically just sat on 3M foam tape, and on the top I've just put a little square of another square of 3M foam tape, and that just basically sandwiches it nicely against the top plate. So when everything's in place, this guy isn't sort of rattling around and it's not causing any vibration. And then down at the front, I've just basically sat my TBS Crossfire Nano beneath the camera at the side, and that allows me to even with the short antenna, to mount it onto the back of the HaloRC Hero 7 mount. Things get more interesting. So we've got the Kiss V2 flight controller, which obviously I had to add in separately, but that caused an issue in the fact that the Fettec the Fettec ESC is 20 by 20 and the Kiss V2 board is 30 by 30. So what I did is I printed off a little 3D mount from Thingiverse, and what that mount does is basically just attach over the top of the 20 by 20 mounts on the ESC with M2, or sorry, should say M3 nuts, and then you basically just mount up into the Kiss board through this TPU section, and you can see the TPU has been designed really well, so it literally hugs all the way around all the connectors on the flight controller. I've got to say, I can't remember who designed this. I got it off Thingiverse. I'll put the link below. But I absolutely love it because A, it provides just enough soft mounting that you don't have to worry about your components on your flight controller being damaged by vibration. And Kiss V2, as I've said before, doesn't need soft mounting, but you want to do it simply because vibration kills components. But even on future builds, I kind of want to look and see if I can use this sort of idea on normal 30 by 30 builds moving forward. And I've basically mounted the ESC using some more of these alloy screws, and you can see them below here, which leads me to my only slight bugbear of this frame. You need to put these screws in before you tighten up the frame, because once you do, it's quite awkward to get your driver in to the stack. It can be done, but you'll see I've kind of like scratched my aluminium nut, my aluminium screw doing it, simply because I was too lazy to undo the bolts. And on the other side, as well as that front cap there, I've put a much bigger 50 volt 680 UF capacitor just sat and zip tied to the side of the frame. And again, you'll notice this little bit of grey here. That's because I'm powering the air unit with a 12 volt regulator, and that 12 volt regulator just sits nicely below this carbon sort of flared arch that the stack mounts on, and it just parks itself really nicely in there. And that just allowed me to use really short wires to run my voltage from my ESC to this regulator here, and then the regulator, the wire runs back and round to the DJI unit at the back. Other than that, it's been a really straightforward build, and everything just sort of goes together nicely, even though we're using a ton more capacitance than I would generally use if I was, using BL Heli 32 ESCs. Which brings me on, actually, I've got a couple of ESCs I want to test, given my issues with the Fettec ESC. And one is this guy, which is the SpeedX GS40F. And back in the day when I used to run single ESCs, SpeedX 30 amp and 20 amp ESCs used to be my go-to because they were really good value and they never busted. But back to the Halo frame. Yeah, it's an absolute peach of a frame. It's really light. This build with the air unit is coming in at a similar weight as my quads without an air unit, and the reason for that is this frame is, 35 grams or so lighter than my normal freestyle frames, which would be 125, 130 grams, and that allows me to get huge efficiency. And the motors that I'm using on this build, which are the Xing 2207 1700 kV, are really old motors. They're the motors that I originally tested on my hyper-low, I can't remember which one it was now, but they've been kicking around for ages, and they're a long way shy of new or smooth running, although in fairness they are still pretty smooth. So which leads me on to when I set up a Kiss quad or a Kiss flight controller quad, I have a set of sort of PIDs that I generally put in, and that tends to give me a really good starting point for a freestyle quad. And I'm quite lazy, and the reason why I like Kiss is you don't have to do a lot of tuning, so a few tweaks from that tends to get me exactly where I want to be. So the surprising thing about using the Fettec ESC is that when I put in those startup PIDs that I always use, on my first pack of the quad felt immense under throttle, but literally the second that I backed off the throttle, I had this crazy sort of shaking up and down, and I never experienced anything like it in my life. It was literally, it wasn't even dropping into my own prop wash or anything like that. It was literally the second that was off the throttle, even if I was just basically floating still, the whole quad would almost vibrate up and down. So I came in and checked my motors, and they were stone cold. So my initial thought was, perhaps it's my idle speed. The Fettec ESC is using a really efficient protocol. It's a lot smoother, or should be a lot smoother than BL Heli 32. So I basically upped my idle speed, and it did nothing at all. And Mark, who I was flying with, said to drop my P, which I did. And I thought that was I couldn't really see why dropping P would have that big of a difference on such a major problem, but I did, and it immediately went away. So as I said, I dropped my P down to, 3.5 or whatever it was, and those issues immediately went away. And the ESC itself, or the powertrain itself, felt immensely smooth, almost like I had more throttle resolution than I was used to. But at the same time, this quad needs further tuning for me. I think what I need to do is basically put in the default Kiss V2 PIDs and then tune upwards from there, because I can't use my lazy tuning method with the Fettec ESC, or at least not yet. So the flight testing that I posted the other day was me basically flying a completely untuned quad, flying also a Jumper T16 Pro, which I've struggled to use because of its really short throw gimbals, and I'm constantly feeling and struggling against. It almost feels like my rates are too high because I'm used to a much longer throw on my Taranis QX7. So the fact that I could sort of, dive into those trees and all of those things on, a badly tuned quad using a radio that I wasn't comfortable is really testament to how good Kiss V2 is. Because even when I say badly tuned, what I'm really talking about is feel for me. There was very little, if any, prop wash, not a huge amount of bounce back. All those classic things are absolutely fine. It's just the feel that I'm looking for, and that feel is probably lacking as much from my new radio as the quad itself. So my thoughts on this build are, the frame is an absolute peach. As I said, so much more that I bought myself another one. I'm going to run Xing motors because I bought 4 for less than 30 quid, and I'm going to see how they compare to more expensive motors such as these ones. The Fettec ESC, I don't know about, if I'm honest. As I've said before, my first one blew for no reason. The designer of this frame has smoked at least a couple, might be 3. Molecule I was flying with at the weekend has smoked one as well, all on 6S. And I suppose the question that I need to ask is whether the ESC just isn't particularly great on 6S, whether it's a little bit fragile, or whether simply adding the the spike remover and 2 huge caps is enough to fix it. Which, if it is, begs the question: is it better than BL Heli 32? And I think my answer to that would be tentatively, possibly. And I say tentatively because I don't think the differences are massive. I think the differences are there, and I think it runs smoother than a BL Heli 32 board running D-Shot 2400, because this one has got an F3 processor on which you need to do that. But I know I can get reliable 30x30 BL Heli 32 ESCs for not a lot of money. The only reason why I would possibly get another one is because if you use the DJI Air unit, you need a 20x20 ESC in this guy, otherwise you'll run out of space very quickly. Whereas if you're not using the DJI unit, you can use whatever size of ESC you want. So yeah, I think I'll get another one, but only to see if it dies, to satisfy my curiosity, and if the other one lasts and survives, then I'll call that a result, and if it doesn't, then I'll never touch it again. But the thing I must say is, even after I crashed, even attempting turtle mode 32 times before I realised I couldn't get out of the bush, every time I went to my quad, the motors were stone cold. And that's pretty impressive. So I can't really knock that. But yeah, I don't think Fettec is essential. I don't think it's groundbreaking. I think it's better, potentially, if it was more reliable. But as I said, I'm probably gonna go down this route with a Kiss V2 board, which in my opinion has a better layout, is lighter, and fits better in a freestyle quad. So yeah, so that's the end of this pretty waffly video. I'd just like to thank Bloods for sending me this original frame to review. I've absolutely fallen in love with it, which doesn't happen that often. Another thing quickly to mention actually is I really like this build mat, which is why I bought it. And I didn't know, but Bloods actually prints these himself. So I've asked him to print me one with my logo on it, which I thought would be just a nice little thing to have. So if anybody else wants, their logo printed on a little build mat, etc., drop him a line and he can probably sort you out something. So as you can see, my voice is going, enough talking, happy flying. Cheers guys, bye bye.